I sell the sea in postcards. Every evening, when Lisbon softens into cobalt and the trams breathe sparks along the rails, I set my wooden crate by the Maradero and pin my sketches to a string with clothespins, sardines and silver pencil. A harbor mouth open like a yawn, boats stitched to the horizon by threads of gulls. People slow down for blue hour. It's the city's way of putting a hand on your shoulder and asking you to stay a little longer. That's when he paused, 1 foot on the tram step, 1 foot on the world. He was tall in the gentle way, as if careful not to cast a shadow over anyone else. Wind brought the smell of salt and something metallic, like rain before it decides to fall. Do you ever draw them moving? He asked, pointing to the sardine shoal curling across my paper. Only when I'm lucky, I said. Movement is expensive. It costs time. He smiled, and it struck me that his smile was made of listening. I chase movement for a living, not catch. Just chase. What do you do? Marine biology, he said, almost apologetically, as if the ocean were a secret he wasn't supposed to tell. Sardina? Pilcardus. Our little silver citizens. He said citizens like a man who believed belonging was measurable. He studied the sketches as though the paper were water and numbers might surface between the strokes. The tram bell clanged behind him, impatient and motherly. You'll miss it, I warned. I already have, he said, stepping back to the street. I'm Marina. I said my mother named me after the place she loved but never saw. The city put on her evening jewelry, windows turning to amber, tiles holding leftover light. Rui bought a postcard of 2 trams crossing like threads on a loom. For luck, he said. If the sardines come back this season, I'll send your drawing with the data report. Proof that art predicted us. Art predicts what it misses, I said. Science explains why. He considered that and didn't argue. A gull hopped closer, judging us with the wise irritation of a small god. Rui tore a corner from the paper bag and fed it to the wind instead of the gull, a respectful refusal. Tomorrow we sail at 6, he said, counting what refuses to be counted. Good hunting. I didn't say be safe. People who chase moving things prefer sentences without nets. He lifted his hand in a shy salute and boarded the next tram. I watched him through the glass as he stood near the back, steady as a mast. On the window, my reflection hovered beside his shoulder for a second, a woman with ink under her fingernails and too many blues in her pockets. When the tram curved away, the rails wrote a brief sentence of light and then crossed it out. Later, I packed my sketches, hugged the crate to my chest, and walked down to the river. It's a habit saying goodnight to water. The Tagus was the color of a bruise sweetening into a plum. Couples sat on the steps licking salt from paper cones, and a guitarist ruined and saved the same song 3 times. At the ferry terminal, a woman in a saffron scarf was arguing, not angrily, just with the brisk clarity of someone who knows where she needs to be. Her voice carried a music that made even the departures board look less bureaucratic. I drew her with 3 quick lines before she vanished into the crowd. Back in my tiny room above the bakery, I boiled water and made tea that tasted faintly of last week's cinnamon rolls. I spread my day on the floor. 15 postcards sold, 3 sketches bartered for coffee, 1 goal forgiven, and a name I didn't want to say out loud in case it startled and Fleury. I taped his tram postcard to the wall, next to a map of the Azores I'd found in a flea market. The islands looked like commas in a sentence the ocean hadn't finished. I thought about sardines, about the way a shoal turns, as if one mind gently suggests, and 1,000 small bodies agree. Movement is expensive, I had said. I switched off the lamp and lay listening to the bakery trays clatter below me, the city's metal lullaby. Somewhere, a tram sighed, settling into sleep. Somewhere else, a marine biologist sharpened his pencils of data and packed his patient nets. I pretended not to count the hours until 6. I pretended not to hope for weather that made the water speak. I pretended not to notice that when I drew the harbor again, it had gained a small figure at the edge, a man standing with 1 foot on memory and 1 foot on the world. And because I am greedy with blue hour, I promised myself nothing. Promises are net. I have learned to love the sea without asking it to stay. Outside, the river kept breathing. Inside, my heart kept time. Tomorrow, perhaps, I would try to draw the sardines moving. Or perhaps they would draw me. When I woke, the light had that milky, undecided color Lisbon wears before sunrise, like the world was still tasting itself. I hadn't slept much. Between the clatter of bakery trays and my own thoughts refusing to cool, the night felt folded into too many halves. I boiled water, poured it over leftover tea leaves, and told myself that if I kept stirring, something might settle. At 6, I carried my sketchbook to the river again. The ferry horn sounded across the mist like a low note that didn't want to end. Down by the docks, I saw Rui's team preparing the small research vessel, a modest thing. White hull scuffed by work, a name painted in fading blue, Lucia Dumar. He stood near the bow, head bent over a tablet, listing numbers I couldn't hear. The wind kept his hair untidy, as if the sea were already claiming him. I didn't mean to call out. I didn't even know what to say. But something must have escaped, because he looked up and waved. Not the big tourist wave, just the short, certain lift of fingers that means, I see you there. I lifted my sketchbook instead of my hand. It felt safer that way. He smiled, then shouted something I couldn't catch. The engine coughed once, then twice, and the boat began to slide out of the harbor. From where I stood, I drew him as a simple outline against the fog. A man dissolving into the morning, carrying data nets and unfinished sentences. When the boat disappeared, I flipped the page and began another sketch. Same docks, no people. Sometimes I like drawing absence. It's more cooperative than presence. By the time the cafes opened, I'd filled half a page with lines of water that didn't know where to end. Marina, I turned. It was Jonah the barista who treated me like an endangered species. She waved from the doorway of her cafe. Coffee before you turn into mist. I went. Because resistance before caffeine is futile. The cafe smelled like roasted almonds and forgiveness. Jonah placed a cup in front of me and leaned her elbows on the counter. You're a sea boy again, she teased. The one who talks like science and looks like summer. Maybe means yes. I smiled into the cup. He's a marine biologist. Then he'll be gone half the time and gone in thought the other half. She shrugged. But they make good stories. We need new ones. Outside, a newspaper headline read, Sardine stocks at historic low. Jonah followed my gaze. They keep disappearing. Maybe they've learned too much about us. I traced a drop of coffee across the counter. Maybe they're tired of being counted. She nodded. That too. Then, softer, you should come tonight. Fado, at the docks. Bring your drawings. People like sad things set to music. People like permission to feel sad. That's the same thing. The day unfolded like a slow tide ends. Sketches, deliveries. By evening, I found myself back near the The city glowed honey and smoke. I pinned new drawings to the line. The fog, the boat, a single sardine drawn from memory. An old man stopped and looked long. You draw them like prayers, he said. Are you religious? No, I said. Just stubborn. He laughed, dropped a coin into my crate, and shuffled away. Later the fado music began from the tavern below, a voice, full of velvet and splinters. The lyrics spoke of sailors, storms waiting. Every note sounded like salt. I closed my eyes and let the sound braid with the night air. Somewhere Rui was at sea, counting what refused to be counted. Maybe he heard the same melody carried by the wind. I didn't draw again. Some nights are not for making lines, but for listening to where they break. When I finally packed up, I noticed the postcard he bought yesterday had fallen from the wall at home. It lay face down, a small, silent surrender. I didn't tape it back. Instead, I tucked it into my sketchbook. Because sometimes, the things we don't display are the ones still growing. It was the kind of afternoon that made the sea look like glass clear enough to believe in promises. Rui had been gone for 6 days. His boat's route showed on the port bulletin, sampling along the coast of Saffron. I checked it every morning, pretending I was just admiring the typography. Jonah said I was developing a dangerous relationship with imaginary geography. I told her that's what artists do, draw maps of waiting. I filled my sketchbook with everything that moved slower than time. Ropes, nets, empty chairs outside cafes. but nothing that breathed like him. On the 7th day, I saw him again. He was at the market, sleeves rolled, skin darker from the wind. He looked different, not tired, just tuned to a quieter frequency. Back from counting the uncountable? I asked. Almost. We found less than expected. Maybe they've gone on holiday. He smiled. Maybe they've found somewhere people don't measure them. We walked together through the stalls, between voices selling salt and sunlight. He bought oranges. I bought pencils. Simple trades to delay goodbyes, neither of us named. We stopped near a record shop. From inside, a piece of music drifted out slow, solemn, a cello folding in on itself like prayer. Rui froze. I watched his pupils tighten, the way recognition sometimes hurts more than surprise. Who is it? I asked, though I already knew it wasn't me in that sound. He said the name softly, almost reverently. Eva. The syllables slid out like a confession that had waited in salt water. She's a composer, he said quickly. We used to work together. Before I left for the coast. Used to? Past tense is such a fragile lie. Is she back? She has a concert next week. A requiem, actually. His fingers brushed the air, as if conducting something invisible. It's for her brother. Drowned near Porto 2 years ago. The market continued its chatter, but the world between us had gone silent. I'm sorry, I said, meaning both her loss and my own realization. He nodded. She sent me the program. Said the final movement was inspired by ocean currents. I suppose I'll have to go. Of course he would. When someone names a piece after the sea, Rui will always listen. We didn't talk much after that. We walked to the end of the market street where the trams turned and sighed. He looked at me like someone watching tide marks fade, aware that the water will return but never the same. Will you come? He asked. To the concert, I mean. I wanted to say no. But I said, maybe. Because honesty is rarely elegant. That night, the city felt heavier, as if the cobblestones had soaked up too many unsent letters. I sat by the window with my sketchbook open, drawing the same outline over and over the curve of a cello merging into a wave. Sometimes, art predicts what it misses. I tried to draw silence, but silence kept sounding like her name. The day of Ava's rehearsal arrived, with the kind of sky that doesn't know whether to bless or to break. I told myself I wasn't going. I had commissions to finish, postcards to print, a life to maintain. But Lisbon is a small city when your thoughts walk faster than your feet. By evening, I found myself near Snow Carlos Theater. The marble steps were warm from the day's light, and people carried programs that fluttered like doves, escaping promises. I told myself I was just passing by. That's what all lost things say before being found. Through the half-open side door, I heard her music, low strings swelling, then falling like waves folding back into themselves. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was recognition. The kind that happens when the sea sees its own reflection and sighs. Inside, rows of empty red seats waited. The air smelled of dust and anticipation. On stage, Eva stood in a pale blue dress, hair tied loosely, conducting with bare hands. She looked like the sea translated into human form. And there, in the 4th row, sat Rui. No notebook, no instruments. Just his eyes, open and unguarded, as if hearing his own past speak fluent music. He didn't see me. Of course he didn't. I stood in the shadow near the side aisle, my heart sinking to her tempo against my will. The cello sang again, a motif I recognized from his humming when he worked. So that's where it came from. He had carried her melody in his silence all along. When the final movement ended, silence hung in the theater pier hole, merciless. Eva smiled faintly at her musicians, then looked into the seats, as if searching for someone specific. Her gaze found Rui. He stood, hesitant, then applauded once, softly, like a prayer he wasn't sure he should say out loud. I left before the lights rose. Outside, the street lamps flickered alive, one by one. Lisbon looked too golden for my mood. I walked without direction until the river found me. There's a corner near the bridge where fishermen leave small candles for the drowned. The wax melts into salt. The flames tremble in the breeze. I lit one for no one in particular, and whispered, "Be remembered, but not returned." It felt too much like a wish. The ferry horn moaned again from the other side. Same note, same ache. I sat on the cold steps, sketchbook open, and drew the stage lights, instead of stars each beam falling on someone else's dream. The pencil broke midway. I let it. Some things end better He called 2 days after the concert. Or maybe it was the tide that called through, his voice soft, deliberate, carrying sand in every pause. I wanted to see you, Rui said. Are you free tonight? I looked at my hands. They were still faintly gray from charcoal, as if I'd been sketching smoke instead of shapes. Yes, I lied. We met near the harbor, where the air always smells half like salt and half like memory. A fishing boat thudded gently against the pier, and seagulls bickered over invisible scraps. Rui looked different, both lighter and older, like someone who had confessed to the ocean and was waiting to see if it forgave him. I went to thank her after the performance, he began. It felt necessary. I nodded, even though something in me braced for cold water. She told me the requiem wasn't for her brother anymore, he said, watching the tide climb the rocks. She said it was for everyone who once drowned quietly, including herself. He paused. The waves filled the silence, obedient as punctuation. I realized she doesn't need me, he continued. She's moved on. Maybe she already had, long ago. That's good, I said, meaning it but not meaning it. She said she was happy I came, that I'd helped her let go of guilt. But the strange thing is, he hesitated. I couldn't tell if I felt relieved or hollow. There it was. The sentence that felt like the sea pulling back, exposing what the water had been hiding. Maybe both, I said. He looked at me then, as if noticing for the first time that I was cold. You should have been there inside, Marina. The music, his voice softened. It was like hearing forgiveness in a foreign language. I wanted to tell him I had been there. That I had seen the way he looked at her, and the way she looked back like a wave recognizing its shore. But I didn't. Because honesty sometimes ruins what distance keeps beautiful. Instead, I said, I heard the echoes from outside. He smiled faintly. You always do. The wind rose, carrying the smell of sardines from the nearby docks. Someone was grilling them in the dark, the sound of oil hissing like tiny arguments. Rui's hand brushed mine by accident, tore maybe on purpose but didn't stay. I'm leaving for the Azores next week, he said. We'll study migration routes. Could take months. Sounds important. It is. But I don't want to go without. He stopped himself. Without what? I asked. He shook his head. Never mind. The sky above the bay was bruised purple, the kind of color that promises rain but never keeps its word. I folded my arms against the chill. Good luck, Rui, I said. Count something that matters this time. He exhaled a quiet laugh, part salt, part regret. Then he said, you matter more than you think. But the words came too late. The tide was already pulling back, and I was standing on the exposed sand, realizing how cold the world could feel once the water leaves. When he walked away, I watched his figure blur against the lamps, not disappearing, just dissolving into distance. That night, I couldn't draw. My pencils lay scattered like small, mute witnesses. The city was quiet, as if holding its breath for something that wouldn't return. I went to the window and whispered to the dark, be remembered, but not returned. The candle I had lit 2 nights ago had melted into a shallow puddle of wax. I touched it, it was cold. Low tide. Everything left behind looked heavier than before. The storm came a day before Rui's departure. The weather app said moderate rain, but Lisbon has never believed in moderation. By noon, the wind had rearranged the street's umbrellas turned inside out. Laundry danced across balconies, and every gull screamed like a prophet ignored too long. I stayed in my small room above the bakery, sketching waves that refused to end. The radio warned of flooding near the harbor, and I thought, of course, the sea never leaves quietly. At 5, Jonah called. You heard? She asked. The docks are half underwater. Rui's team is stuck at the Marina. The name felt like thunder arriving before sound, recognized before spoken. Is he okay? They're securing the boats. Don't go down there, Marina. Why not? Because you don't rescue people who never asked to be saved. She was right. But sometimes, Reason loses to muscle memory. By the time I reached the harbor, rain had turned the air into something you could drown in standing up. The Lucia Dumar strained against its ropes, bow nodding like an animal trying to escape. Rui was on deck, soaked, shouting orders above the wind. He saw me through the rain. His surprise was brief, then replaced by that same careful concern he reserved for fragile equipment. "What are you doing here?" he shouted. I could ask you the same. Lightning cracked behind us, briefly turning the water white. For an instant, it looked like every unspoken thing between us had been lit from within. "You shouldn't be here," he said again, moving closer. "It's not safe. Neither is loving someone who's already at sea," I said before I could stop myself. He froze. For a heartbeat, the world went quiet except for the rain. Then he stepped forward, hands gripping my shoulders. Marina, the wind cut his words in half, carried them somewhere unreachable. I looked up at him, his face wet, his breath uneven, and realized he wasn't holding me for love, but for balance. Something in me let go. "You'll miss your tide," I said. He shook his head. "I can't just leave like this." "Yes, you can," I managed to smile. "That's what you're best at." He stared, and for a second I thought he might pull me closer. But instead, he released his grip. The absence of his hands felt heavier than their weight. "All right," he said. "No," I whispered. "You won't." A wave slammed against the pier, drenching us both. It didn't matter. Everything was already soaked: skin, words, hopes. "Goodbye, Rui." I turned before he could answer. The rain pushed against me like a living thing, but it felt almost merciful. It blurred everything equally: sky, sea, and the line between leaving and being left. By the time I reached the bakery, the streets were rivers. I wrung out my hair in the sink, poured myself tea, and watched water climb the curb outside. I thought about the candle I hadn't replaced. Maybe I didn't need one. The city was full of small lights to night windows, headlights, lightning, all temporary, all enough. When the storm finally eased near midnight, I drew again. This time, not the sea, but the shape absence takes. A hand mid-reach, a rope untied, a name mouthed but not spoken. I signed it low tide. The paper warped where raindrops had fallen. A reminder that even art gets wet when you stand too close to what you love. 3 weeks passed after the storm. The sea calmed first. I didn't. Rui's name stopped appearing on the harbor bulletin. The Lucia Dumar had sailed for the Azores, and Jonah told me they'd sent postcards from Ponta Delgada. Blue water, bright sky, science scribbled on the back. None were addressed to me. I tried to pretend peace was progress. Every morning I opened my window and let the bakery smell rise like forgiveness. I drew ordinary things: coffee cups, laundry lines, the shape of time when it's trying to behave. Then, one evening, a courier knocked on my door. "Delivery for Marina Soros," he said, holding a damp envelope. The paper looked like it had crossed an ocean of its own. Inside was a letter not sealed, just folded. The handwriting was Rui's, meticulous and uneven at once. The top corner carried a postal note, misrouted, returned to sender. But someone, somewhere, had decided sender meant me. I sat by the window and read, "Marina, I'm writing this under the lighthouse on Snow Hor. The wind is cruel here, but honest. It tells me what I already know: you were right. The night of the storm, I wanted to say so many things. I wanted to say that leaving isn't my habit, it's my nature. The sea taught me that nothing stays, not even water. Ava's music helped me remember what I'd been escaping, not who. She isn't what I'm looking for anymore. But neither is home. I think I've built my life out of departures, and that's why I never arrive anywhere completely. You once told me movement is expensive. I didn't understand then. I do now. I've spent every currency of calm chasing tides that don't belong to me. If I ever come back, it won't be to claim anything. It will be to thank you for seeing me without a map." Rui, yes, I didn't send this. Maybe because part of me hopes you never read it. The letter ended without a signature flourish. Just a smear of salt at the estuarine, or sea, I couldn't tell. I folded it back and watched the lighthouse on the far side of the river blink on. Its beams swept across the water, patient and methodical, as if counting seconds instead of saving souls. For a moment, I thought about answering, but what could I say? Thank you for the absence. I placed the letter on the windowsill and let the evening wind play with its corners. When the light swept over it, the page glowed faintly like something forgiving itself. That night, I walked down to the docks. The fishermen were repairing nets, humming fado under their breath. I carried Rui's letter and a piece of string. At the base of the old lighthouse, I tied the envelope to a nail, among other forgotten offerings, prayers, photos, names. It fluttered once, caught the light, and stilled. Movement is expensive, I whispered to the sea, but letting go costs more. The tide answered with a hiss, as if agreeing. I turned to leave, the lighthouse beam brushing my back like a hand that knew when to stop touching. When I looked once more, the letter was still there, half shadow, half light. Exactly like him. The news came quietly, as most endings do. A small note appeared in the local paper's maritime column. Research vessel Lucia Dumar returns early due to funding withdrawal. No casualties. No explanations. Just bureaucracy disguised as mercy. I read it 3 times, each slower than the last. So he was back. That night, the bakery ceiling leaked in one corner. The owner said the pipes were tired. Aren't we all, I thought. Rain tapped against the window like someone rehearsing the courage to knock. I kept drawing through it. Boats half sunk in memory, ropes slack with resignation. Around midnight, there was a knock for real. When I opened the door, Rui stood there, rain-soaked again, as if storms were the only way he knew to arrive. Hi, he said simply. He looked thinner, wind-burned, and exhausted in the quiet way that makes you want to whisper around it. His eyes had lost their scientist's precision. They looked almost human now. I thought you'd still be away, I said. So did I. He held up a small cloth bag. Coffee beans. I remembered you always said the sea makes everything taste flat. I stepped aside to let him in. The room filled with the smell of salt and apologies. He looked around the sketches, the laundry, the map of the Azores still pinned to the wall. His gaze lingered on the blank spot where the tram postcard used to hang. I got your letter, I said softly. He froze. I never sent, I know. Something like relief flickered through him, but it was short-lived. Then you know everything. I know you're sorry, I said. And that sorry isn't the same as stay. He sat on the edge of the chair, hands clasped like a man waiting for a verdict. The project collapsed. Funding gone, data corrupted by the storm. It's all he stopped. I don't even know if I still know how to count. Maybe stop counting, I said. Some things are better left unmeasured. He looked up, and for a moment, the air between us remembered how to breathe. I missed you, he said quietly. More than I expected. And I stopped missing you, I answered. Less than I hoped. We both smiled a little at the symmetry of pain. The kettle whistled then, mercifully interrupting. I poured the water. He poured the beans into my old grinder, turning the handle slowly, like winding back time. The smell filled the room, familiar and final. Do you ever regret it? He asked. Us? No, I said. Regret belongs to what could have been better. We were exactly what we could be. He nodded, eyes glistening not with tears, but with acceptance's dull shine. When he left, he didn't ask if he could come back. I didn't offer. At the doorway, he hesitated. If I find something worth staying for, you won't have to explain it, I finished. He smiled a small salt-soaked surrender and walked into the drizzle. I watched until he disappeared around the corner, the sound of his steps dissolving into rain. The coffee cooled quickly. I drank it anyway, bitter and true. On my table, his letter still lay open, edges curled from the damp. I placed my latest sketch beside it. 2 boats drifting apart, their ropes frayed but still shining where the light touched them. I titled it Collapse of the Net, because sometimes, when everything breaks, that's when the sea finally tells the truth. The city was dressed for music. Posters for Eva Lacerda's Requiem for the Drowned covered tram stops and cafe doors, their blue ink bleeding slightly from the humidity. The same cello silhouette I'd once sketched now floated across Lisbon like a ghost that had finally found its audience. I hadn't planned to go, but Jonah insisted. You can't hide forever, Marina, she said, tying her apron. If you don't listen, the past will keep humming until it turns into background noise. So I went. Not for him. Not even for her. Just to prove that silence doesn't scare me anymore. The theater was full rows of faces half lit by anticipation. I sat near the back, close enough to see, but far enough to disappear. The air shimmered with the sound of tuning, like anxiety disguised as art. When the lights dimmed, I saw him. Rui in a dark suit that didn't quite fit, standing by the aisle. He looked thinner still, like someone who'd lost weight in memories. Our eyes met once, just enough for recognition, not reaction. Then the orchestra began. The first movement was gentle, a wash of strings like water remembering itself. But the second was different. In the cello's motif, I heard something familiar, short strokes, then pauses, like breaths between words. My sketches. The shapes I'd drawn of waves and fishing ropes. The curves of gull wings. They were in her projections above the stage. Eva had taken them, digitized them, turned them into motion. My drawings danced with the music. Rui's eyes widened. He looked up at the screen, then down at the program in his hands, and I saw the moment he understood. The requiem wasn't about her brother. It was about everything she'd borrowed from the world, including him. And perhaps, about what he'd borrowed from me. He sat down slowly, like someone obeying gravity for the first time. When the final note fell, no one clapped immediately. The silence after music is the truest measure of it. Then applause rose, thunderous, cleansing. Eva came on stage, radiant and fragile, bowed once, twice, and gestured toward the projected waves. Dedicated, she said into the microphone. To all who listened when the sea spoke softly. Rui didn't move. I watched him from the shadows. His expression unread, a blue man, both found and lost in the same moment. When the audience stood, I stayed seated. The lights lifted, warm and merciless. He turned, scanning the crowd, but I was already gone. Outside, the night smelled of rain and perfume, a mix of endings and something that might become peace. I walked along the river until the music faded into memory. The water glowed faintly under the lamps, as if holding its own applause. For the first time in months, I didn't wait for anything. Not a message, not a knock, not even forgiveness. I stood by the water and whispered, "Be remembered, but not returned." The tide rose slowly, covering the rocks one by one, and I realized it wasn't coming for me anymore. The morning after the concert, Lisbon smelled of rain and baked bread. The city was rinsed clean, like someone had forgiven it overnight. The trams moved slower, more careful, as if even metal could learn tenderness. I walked to the Miradoro again, the same place where it all began. My wooden crate still fit the curve of the wall. The same gull waited on the railing, arrogant as ever. I pinned new sketches to the string. The lighthouse, the letter, a tide receding into light. I didn't expect him to come, but he did. Rui appeared at the corner, carrying no bag, no instruments, just the quiet weight of someone who had run out of words to measure with. He stopped a few steps away. "I saw you last night," he said. "I know. I wanted to find you after the concert, but you didn't." He nodded. "I never finish what matters." The wind moved between us, filling the space with the smell of salt and the distant sound of church bells. "I realized," he said, "the requiem wasn't about death. It was about what survives it." I smiled faintly. "Then you understand why I didn't stay." He took another step forward. "You were the only calm I ever knew, Marina. But I mistook it for the sea. And I mistook you for sure." We both laughed, softly. The kind of laugh that comes after a storm, when the world is still fragile, but finally breathing. He looked at my sketches. "You're still drawing tides." "I'm learning to draw what stays still." A long pause stretched between us, comfortable this time. He said, "I'm leaving Lisbon. There's an institute in Bergen that wants to study how currents forget their origins." "That sounds like you," I said. He smiled. "It sounds like trying again." He reached into his pocket, took out a small shell, and placed it on my crate. "Found it on Saint Georges. The only thing the sea decided to give back." I touched the shell. It was smooth, pale, unbroken. "Keep it," he said, "or throw it away. Either would be right." I nodded. "Safe travels, Rui." He hesitated. Do you ever think we'll meet again? Maybe, I said. But I hope not for the same reasons. He looked at me for a long moment, long enough for the wind to change direction, then turned, walking down toward the harbor. He didn't look back. And for once, I didn't either. When he disappeared into the curve of the street, I exhaled slowly, like the city itself was teaching me how. The gull took off suddenly, white wings slicing the air. The horizon was clear. I sat on the wall and began a new sketch. No people this time. Just the sea resting, and the sky finally learning its shape. On the back of the paper, I wrote, "To remember is to forgive without permission." The church bell struck noon. Somewhere far off, a ferry sounded its horn. The tide turned, patient, endless, kind, and the world, for the first time in a long time, did not ache.